We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. 3 trending wide receivers for NFL Week 2. Obviously, we get to welcome back my good buddy from Yahoo Sports, Reception Perception, and his new YouTube channel. Don't forget about that, guys. It's an amazing resource if you're looking for a bunch of great information on wide receivers and just fantasy football in general. You guys know him. You love him. Matt Harmon. Harmon, how's it going, my man?
Man, Joe, it's great. Still feel like I'm digesting the fact that we've got real life games to talk about, player movement, everything like that. But it's awesome to be, in your words, it is awesome to be back. It's awesome to be here and talking about football that is really happening. And, that big reveal from week 1 is always very exciting. And now we're kind of left to decide what was real and what was a mirage.
Exactly. I guess we should probably touch on it before we get too deep into week 2. But what do you make of this Brandon Ayuk goose egg, man? I had to take him out of my studio. He's no longer in the studio. I had a jersey, a Brandon Ayuk jersey back there that we were giving away. But I had to take it out before the show, man. People are not happy about this.
Yeah, and I get it. Listen, the thing about me when I tell you to go all in on a guy because of reception perception, I go in on that guy as well. I'm not one of these people that just tells you to do something and then I don't do it. So I've got Brandon Ayuk on a lot of my teams. I had a lot of goose eggs in my flex spot or my wide receiver 3 spot this past week. So my read on this whole situation is I don't think this is like a Dante Pettis situation where, from a couple years ago, Shanahan was very publicly critical of Dante Pettis. He has been still very complimentary about Brandon Ayuk, all while saying he missed a lot of time. He's been inconsistent because of this hamstring injury. And also, I like the other guys on the team, which from a fantasy perspective, like the Trenton Sherfield thing is very frustrating. But from a real life 49ers perspective, they absolutely needed somebody to step up from that wide receiver 3 spot. So if Sherfield's a good player like that, I can understand why they want to invest in this guy. Overall, though, I'm not panicking because, Pettis, as I mentioned earlier, was a guy that was thrown into the doghouse and then was, publicly kind of dragged by Shanahan and then eventually cut. Pettis was a guy who had a bad reception perception profile as a collegiate player and then had what I would say like an okay rookie season. I posted this on Twitter as well. Ayuk is up there as like a potential superstar. I believe it is much more difficult to throw a Brandon Ayuk in the doghouse for good than it is a Dante Pettis type of guy. So I think we're just dealing with a frustrating situation here where the coach wants this guy to earn his reps back. And I don't know what to say other than it is what it is. I've got Ayuk on all my teams. I'm not going to play Brandon Ayuk in fantasy, whether it's daily fantasy, whether it's redraft, whether it's dynasty. I'm not going to play him until I see he runs a full complement of routes this week, next week, whatever, or he just breaks out on my bench, which I know is very frustrating, but I think at some point we're going to get right in this situation. It's just a very weird thing, and unfortunately, I think it's all injury driven, right? That's
Sure.
The biggest problem that we have here, and it's just we just got to wait till it gets right. We've seen these situations before, when guys have been decoys out there, like they're not just straight inactive after injuries, and it does appear that they want him to earn his spot back, and I think based on his ability, he will earn that spot back sooner than later.
Harmon, no one's mad at you, man. Reception perception tells you what it tells you. Obviously, you're making you're planting your flag on some of these guys that a lot of people aren't willing to. And no one's mad at you, Harmon. I just want to make sure that we're okay. It's week 2, like everything is fine.
I'm not worried. I'm not worried about it. I feel for the constant stress of other people out there that have followed. I feel for you all. I feel your pain out there. I don't care whether. I don't think anybody's mad at me, and I don't care if they are, because it's like, look. I told a couple people. Listen, Joe. A couple people have already let me have it about.
They've let you know. I'd imagine. Yeah, I'd imagine.
They've let me know whether it's in the YouTube comments or a couple Twitter messages or whatever in the mentions, and all I say is like, just check with me at the end of the season. Make sure you come back if you've left this comment here after week 1. Just make sure I hear from you again in week 17 or 18 or whatever the hell it is.
Dude, I feel for you. Stay out of the comments, number one, on YouTube specifically.
Oh, no,
that should have been one of the first things that I told you when you started doing this. But yeah, TikTok actually is worse. I had this one video where I was talking about DeAndre Swift being like one of the worst picks in fantasy. And trust me, the victory laps over on TikTok were real this past week about me being the dumbest guy on the website. So yeah, man, let's not waste any more time here. Let's jump into some stuff for week three trending wide receivers here. The first guy that we were going to talk about is someone that I think is going to be on a lot of people's radar going into this week, basically because of his price on FanDuel. He's 6,200. Cooper Kupp, he's at Indy. Not the best matchup, but man, this Rams offense has been pretty exciting so far.
Yeah, Rams offense was electric in week one. Like, there was so much sunshine, rainbows, flowery talk coming out of LA between Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford. And if you had any doubt as of why, you basically saw it in week one. I mean, it took, 3 plays, Matthew Stafford's second pass attempt before he uncorks a deep ball on play action to Van Jefferson. And it was pretty unbelievable. I ranked Cooper Kupp ahead of Robert Woods coming into this year because I believed, that Cooper Kupp he has one of the most unique roles in the entire NFL. I probably have mentioned this on your show before, but it's worth revisiting now. In reception perception history, there is no receiver over the last 3 years that has faced press coverage and man coverage at a lower rate consistently than Cooper Kupp. And I think that is because he is schemed so well. He basically plays like a big tight end role. If you want to think about, basically, there's not that much difference between Darren Waller's assignment and Cooper Kupp's assignment, despite the fact that they have, TE and WR next to their name. They basically play the same position and play that same type of role, which I think is awesome for Cooper Kupp. Sean McVay has done a great job of scheming him a role in the NFL. My analysis with him was playing in that type of position now with the quarterback like Matthew Stafford, who has, shown well with players like Golden Tate in that slot receiver role before. But Cooper Kupp is like a souped up version of Golden Tate. He's bigger, he's more athletic, he's quicker, can still win in the contested spaces and after the catch. I love Cooper Kupp this year, and based on what I saw in week one, I wouldn't be surprised if he's like a top 10 receiver in fantasy this year. I know that seems aggressive because he wasn't drafted as that, but I had him as wide receiver 15. And if Stafford is going to play as good as he did in week one, which, we're not going to get that type of efficiency every single week, but I'm very just bullish on this offense overall. I'm definitely going to be bullish on the guy that I view as their top pass catcher. One concerning note for Robert Woods, who I'm not saying I'm out on Robert Woods or anything, but he did run the fourth most routes on this team behind Tyler Higbee, who I loved coming into this year, and I absolutely just love what I saw in week one. And Van Jefferson too. I think Van Jefferson is a good player. I think Van Jefferson and Robert Woods, they will kind of start they're not going to have the same production, obviously, but I think Woods will get some of his looks eaten into by Van Jefferson because Jefferson's a good player who can win as an X receiver, which this team desperately needs. And I think all of that just leads back to Cooper Kupp being the guy and still kind of mispriced across the industry basically on what I think he's going to do this year.
Yeah, man. I'll say this from a DFS perspective, it was very tilting to see that Van Jefferson bomb when everyone, at least I thought, I was like, oh, Deshaun Jackson, there we go. We're golden. So that was not fun in week one. But I guess my biggest concern, and not to be completely negative, because I know a lot of people are probably going to be talking about Kupp this entire week for good reason. Man, there's a lot of mouths to feed here, it feels like, right? You mentioned Higbee. Yeah. He's someone that I think we could be talking about in the upper echelon of the tight ends this year before not. Man, he's still so cheap. So I'm not down on Kupp by any means. It just feels like Kupp, I don't expect Woods to just completely disappear either, like you said. So it's one of those ones that I'm with you for sure. I love Cooper Kupp. Anyone that's been watching my shows for the last couple years, I probably play Kupp more than most people. But man, there's a lot of good players on this offense now, and that's even before we get into Darrell Henderson if they decide to go a little bit of a different route in this spot against Indy. The pace is not going to be great overall. So we're gonna have to keep a pulse, I guess, on what happens with ownership. The price tag is amazing. So tough to really argue with you there. But I guess, do you see this end up being one of those offenses that's amazing? Like a Tampa Bay, it's an amazing offense to target, but it gets spread out so thin across some amazing weapons that a lot of these guys might not be as good as they seem for fantasy, or am I kind of overthinking that?
No, I don't think you're overthinking it, especially if Van Jefferson establishes himself as a down-in, down-out threat at this position. And at some point, Deshaun Jackson's going to have that big game. But that was one of my big takeaways from week one, is that, oh yeah, Deshaun is a limited snap player. Absolutely there, which, by the way, that was the signal all through Rams camp. I think Deshaun Jackson, Jordan Rodriguez mentioned this on our Yahoo podcast, Deshaun Jackson had told her, I've never been on a pitch count before, but I'm actually really on a pitch count, which shout out to you, Eagles. What a dumb thing to do with Deshaun Jackson later in his career, not put him on a pitch count. So if Van's going to be that type of guy going forward, it's going to spread out the target distribution anymore. So I don't think you're wrong. And it is going to be one of those situations where someone gets left out in the cold every single week, just like with Tampa Bay. Perfect example in week 1. Chris Godwin 8, Antonio Brown 8, Gronk, he 8. Then Mike Evans totally left out in the cold. And I mean, San Francisco, obviously it was weird in week 1 with the Ayuk thing, but that's like a perfect example of what's going to happen in San Francisco too. Somebody's going to absolutely dominate. Somebody, George Kittle in week 1 is going to have like an I-8 game, and then somebody's going to be left out in the cold. Ayuk was an extreme example in week 1, but these type of teams that have extremely good offenses and extremely good skill position players, somebody's going to get banged every single week. I think the guy that's least likely to get banged in all of these situations, like Godwin in Tampa Bay, and Cooper Kupp, playing kind of a similar role. Godwin's more of a traditional wide receiver, whereas Cooper Kupp, like I mentioned, plays that really unique role. I think he's the least likely to get left out in the cold every single week. But I do agree with your point overall.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where we're going to have to keep an eye on pricing because there's so much value in these offenses that have a very condensed target share. The Minnesotas, the KCs, those type of teams, and these ones that get a little bit more spread out. It's totally fine if the prices stay where they're at, but I think we need to keep kind of a pulse on where these guys lead us. This week in particular, definitely think that Cooper Kupp, one of the best plays on the board. So your second guy in terms of some guys that are probably way too cheap still, Rondale Moore. He's 4,900 on FanDuel, this Arizona wide receiver against Minnesota this week. So a lot of people probably running to their waiver wire, grabbing Christian Kirk after his 2 touchdowns last week, but it sounds like you're not giving up on the rookie just yet.
Oh, no. And I mean, it is a little difficult with Rondale Moore because, he runs just 14 routes overall in that game, which is behind Christian Kirk. It's behind Chase Edmonds at running back. It's behind AJ Green and obviously DeAndre Hopkins. So there is that. But I think what we saw from a skill set perspective with Rondale Moore, he gets 5 targets on those routes from like a target per route basis. When he was on the field, he was a priority to get the ball. Also, we saw him still get those layup targets like under 5 air yards per target, but you'll see the yards per catch figure is still very high. That's because he's great after the catch, man. He's exactly, I think, what we expected him to be coming into the NFL. So I know he has been a guy that in my Discord channel and the reception perception Discord has been a lot of questions about is he kind of on that droppable range? Is Christian Kirk the guy? I think Christian Kirk playing as the second, the one of 2 slot receivers, because we know this team wants to go 4 wide so heavy, is great news for Christian Kirk. I think that's much more conducive to his skill set. I do not believe he has ever been good enough in reception perception versus press coverage to be an outside starting receiver. It's good news for Kirk that he has that role that might make him a little more consistent, but I don't think the gap between Kirk and Rondale Moore is as dramatic as the fantasy finish line was last week. So I still think Moore is going to be in consideration as a wide receiver 4 every single week in fantasy, and definitely somebody that I'm still interested as long as his price tag stays low in daily fantasy. This game, I played Kyler Murray basically everywhere last week, and I think that was really it's kind of it's one of those things that we got to do in week 1, which is what's the real reality, even if it's a little bit of both here. Is Tennessee's defense that bad, or is Arizona's offense taking the leap? I think it's probably a little bit of both, but either way, if Arizona's offense has taken that leap, it's good news for all these players, including Rondale Moore.
5 targets on 20 routes. That's pretty good. So I'll take that. 20 snaps, actually, not 20 routes. That's actually pretty crazy to think of it that way. But yeah, there's going to be, I think, enough room in this offense for more, obviously, than just Nuke. I think a secondary, maybe in a third piece in this offense to get there. So obviously, like what I saw from my Cardinals. Man, the NFC West is just so strong this year. That's just going to be a fun division to watch, I think, as we progress. Matt, I want to make sure we have enough time for your last guy, CeeDee Lamb. He is the one price that really stood out to me as soon as we did our first look on Monday, 6,800 on FanDuel against the Chargers. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb is someone that we expect really great things from this season. But tell us why he's someone that we should be paying attention to in week 2.
Listen, we talked about these teams like LA and Tampa Bay and San Francisco that have a lot of really good players, and we expect the offenses to be good. In a situation, think of that situation in Tampa Bay, if Mike Evans was to get hurt or Chris Godwin was to get hurt, we're basically we're taking that guy left out in the cold. We're kind of taking that off the board. I think that's the situation that's happened now in Dallas with Michael Gallup obviously out. Gallup was playing a big role, looking good, getting targets. Obviously goes on IR. By the way, I have Gallup on like every single fantasy redraft team. It's just an absolute killer.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
I'm
round
with you.
9, Michael Gallup, round 10, Curtis Samuel. Great. Tough
Not
scene
great.
there in week 1. Yeah. How many IR spots does this league have? But no,
Hopefully
anyways,
multiple.
like
Yeah.
hopefully multiple. But with CeeDee Lamb though, I think we still like a couple of the signals that we got out of week 1. Number 1, he got a ton of targets. We know that, but also several deep targets, which is important for him. You know, he was a guy that was mostly a layup slot receiver. Actually, I mentioned Cooper Kupp as like a player comparison in reception perception from a pure role standpoint last year, but we know that CeeDee Lamb is much more of a true outside potential alpha receiver, like what we saw out of him in week 1 from a 10.6 average depth of target. That was actually a little bit higher than Amari Cooper. Obviously Cooper got some red zone looks that made a pretty big difference there, but nevertheless, like, I think everything from CeeDee Lamb's usage was really good about this potential like year 2 leap into being more of a down in, down out X receiver, like guy that wins outside the numbers, is more of a deep target. So I like that. But at the same time too, we know that he can function in that short layup role alongside Amari Cooper, who plays that flanker position about as well as anybody else in the NFL. And I think one of the things that was really interesting about watching the LA Chargers in week 1, obviously the Cowboys week 2 opponent, man, they are basically running that Brandon Staley defense like what they did in LA last year. Obviously Staley's the head coach, was the defense coordinator for the Rams last year. They're not going to give you anything deep. Like they're going to have to, like, basically the way teams are going to have to play defenses like this is just keep chugging in the short areas and be patient and like ignore your instinct to take that shot. I think that really lines up well with CeeDee Lamb's skill set, even if we are excited that he's getting some higher deeper looks. Overall though, we know that he can function in that layup role, and I think that's pretty crucial going into this matchup overall. Dallas is going to have to be smart about just not taking those shots on a huge basis, because that defense is just basically encouraging you to keep it short. And I think that a guy like CeeDee Lamb can be pretty big in that type of approach.
Man, you mentioned the deep targets. Weighted opportunity rating is probably one of my favorite metrics for fantasy across the board, because it takes into consideration air yards, market share of air yards, all of those good things. It's basically Tyreek Hill all the way up here, but some guys directly after him. It's Cooper Kupp, it's Tyler Lockett, it's CeeDee Lamb, it's DJ Chark, Stephon Diggs. A lot of these guys that are some of your guys, man. So we should give you a little bit of props here in, I guess, where the I guess high equity targets, they're going to the best players, and reception perception always does a really good job at uncovering those. So anything else on CeeDee before we get you out of here? This is going to be a game I think is going to be extremely popular for sure.
Yeah, I think it will be extremely popular. And the great part is, you know, if you're going to run it back with some of these Chargers guys, there's such a clear target distribution there between Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Loved Mike Williams this year. Loved his usage from week 1. But Jared Cook also, you know, as a cheap play at tight end, not the worst thing in the world. Like, he was clearly the top guy there, potentially the third pass catcher in that offense when you take Austin Eckler off the board, like strictly from wide receiver to tight end. Like, at some point, obviously Austin Eckler is going to get more volume from the passing game. I'm not concerned about that. But love, if you're going to stack up these Cowboys, like running it back in a tournament situation with some of your Chargers, very easy to do because you know where the ball's going.
Love it, man. Obviously, you're doing the podcast with TJ Hernandez this year over at 4 for 4. So I guess, spoiler alert, if you're watching this video, you should definitely check out TJ's pivot video after this one, because one of the guys that he did mention was kind of a contrarian way to go about this Chargers team in week 2. So keep an eye out for that. Matt Harmon, everybody. Let me know in the comments your favorite wide receiver play for week 2.